We are here in the new Urban Agenda interview corner with Paulius from UNHabitat. Welcome.
Thank you. Pleased to be here. It's an honor.
So, what actions are already happening to implement the new agenda?
Well, that would take a very long time to list all the actions that are happening now in Europe, where I work. But I think the most important is that they are happening on different levels. You would see some of the governments that are instituting or revising their national urban policies in order to readjust the policies, but also the institutional frameworks for implementing the achieving sustainable development goals, and also for implementing the new urban agenda. You would see cities who are trying to see how they can implement the main goals and the urban dimension of sustainable development goals in their cities. And here I want to make a parenthesis. You know that 70% of the action to be taken to implement the sustainable development goals have to be taken on a subnational, on a city level. So they are getting very busy. Some of the cities are reconsidering of what they ought to do because if you take, for example, the mayor of Rotterdam, he said, well, I mean, on the first look, we have implemented everything already before the new urban agenda came. But now I think this understanding is coming that not necessarily everything that is written in the agenda has to be treated in a simple manner. We have citizen groups, we have civil society groupings, we have professional groups such as Eurocities and Council of European Municipalities and Regions, who are also working very actively with their members to planning and taking actions to implement new urban agenda. So there is a lot happening on all different levels.
Here in the Congress, we see the private sector, many companies offering their products. How would you say that we can combine the technological possibilities with the bottom-top approach?
Well, there's very different dimensions on how private sector is engaging with the Sustainable Development Goals and the new urban agenda. I'll give you one example. For example, we visited Solvay, which is a chemical products company in Belgium, who have voluntarily adopted the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework for long-term risk management. In the beginning, I thought this was an exercise, in corporate social responsibility and showing the markets that the company is responsible and working with UN framework. But they say, no, we are not selling on the market, we are selling components to other companies. So this is not an exercise in social responsibility. They said that they believe that this gives a very good framework for looking into the far future on what is going to become important and to direct their products towards what this framework is exposing. I think here you would also find very different companies, and I've had contact through the panels and then speeches with several of them. And I think that this understanding that it is not just something to be used in marketing, but that Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2030 and the new urban agenda is a framework that is guiding not just the governments, not just the city governments, but also gives a good opportunity for the private sector companies, technology or different other kinds of production to guide the development of their products is also coming into mind for many of those companies already.
Thank you. The new urban agenda has a significant focus on resilience. How do you think that we can have a more resilient cities? How can cities become more resilient?
Well, resilience is an overarching concept. It has very many different dimensions, from resilience from disasters, either nature or man-made, resilience to economic crises, resilience to climate change, and that there's many different other things that come into the picture. I think resilience is not, it's a different viewpoint which helps the cities, once they understand it, to start thinking differently and to bring all the frameworks that they are using, the policy frameworks, the institutional frameworks, the technological frameworks, into a concept which helps them to be more ready for different eventualities that may come. But there is another value in the concept of resilience, and this is understanding that it brings understanding of relationships between very many different things. And I could easily sort of very quickly give an example, because the complexity of urban development is very high. You remember that some decades ago we started speaking that the cities develop with some kind of silos. Infrastructure is developed separately, and then there is health, and there is education, and then there is mobility, and each of these are taken separately and they have to be integrated. Then we started speaking about different sectors of society, that there is a government, there is a civil society, that there is private sector, then there is third sector, and these also all have to work together if the urban development has to succeed. Then we started speaking about different territorial scales, a neighborhood, a city, a metropolitan area, the whole country, system of cities. So in a spatial sense, this is also very complex. But now we are also speaking about the multi-level governance and saying that the national government has to work together with the cities, with the regions. So you see that there's many dimensions to this complexity. I think resilience is a goal, because cities want to be resilient. But this is also a very good approach that helps to bring these many dimensions of complexity together.
And in front of this complexity, what does UNHabitat expect from this Congress?
No, we don't expect anything in particular. We are trying to work with the cities and to enable them to adopt approaches that could emphasize the ability of the cities to develop sustainable urban development. It is not just a goal in itself. You know that cities are a very powerful socio-economic engine, and that cities produce a lot of GDP, but there are many issues that neither the citizens nor the politicians are necessarily happy with. You have seen that the urban planning has been decreasing, and that brought about cities which are less convenient to live, that there is a lack of urban equity, that the gap, the social gap is growing, and the city centers, for example, in many instances become not affordable for a huge part of population, not only to live in terms of housing, but also to visit. So there are many issues that will have to be solved, and I think that we, as a part of United Nations, a part of promoting the framework that has been agreed by the member states, we can also advise, we can facilitate, we can enable exchanges of good practices, because we as a global organization often know where things are happening. But most importantly, this is not a one-way direction that we are promoting and that we are preaching and that we are telling someone who to do. This is a great process of learning. I think that the biggest value of our biggest role, if you wish, of UNHabitat as part of United Nations is that we have been for many years promoting the role of the cities and trying to bring them to the table of negotiations and where issues are being decided. Because, well, I mean, we live in a world of the nation states. It is an intergovernmental mechanism where the governments meet, and it is important that cities, which are also a part of the governance system, it's not a voluntary association, a mayor is an elected politician, that they are at the same table and that they can bring their perspective to the global debate.
And how is United Nations Habitat monitoring all the process?
Well, there's many ways of monitoring, and I think that some countries and some cities are becoming a little bit scared of the multiplicity of indicators and the data that they will have to collect. For one thing, there is a system of indicators also approved by the member states to monitor implementation of Agenda 2030. And these indicators are further disaggregated. And as I said before, probably about more than half, certainly, are pertaining to the action on the city level. But this is not something that cities will have to do additionally. They are collecting and monitoring this data already. As UNHabitat, even before New Urban Agenda was adopted, we had so-called City Prosperity Initiative. Many hundreds of cities are now members of this initiative, which help them measure different aspects of prosperity in the cities, the well-being of their citizens, but also allows comparing one city to the other. You know, cities always want to compete a little bit. But we also have, I think it is very important that we have a World Urban Forum, which has a session every second year, where nowadays about 20,000 people from very different parts of the society, mayors, activists, citizens, ministers, private sector, come together to share these experiences of what they are doing to make their cities better. And I think that is bringing in a very good narrative in addition to all this data that allows to see living real people working to achieve the goals that have been agreed by the governments, but also which make their life better.
Thank you so much for your time and for being here. Thank you.